it's interesting what you say about that kind of time period where he was first champion, because that was the time when I first became a fan. So as we've talked about before, SummerSlam 1992 was what hooked me. That's when I became a lifelong fan of wrestling. That first run that Bret had as world champion, it was like, and it still feels strange to talk about Hulk Hogan in the past tense really now. But Hulk Hogan had left the company, but he was kind of 1 foot out, 1 foot in. He'd retired at WrestleMania 8, but it was like a dip in the toe in the water. So the whole time that Bret was champion the first time, it was kind of like under the shadow of, would Hulkamania return? And obviously we see what happens at WrestleMania 9, and Bret's written about that in his book and spoken a lot about that in the past. And it felt like for all of 1993, there was the kind of bigger champion that Vince McMahon wanted at the top, from Hulk Hogan and to Yokozuna to the Lex Luger rivalry. And then Bret was just organically bubbling just below the entire time. And I always liken Bret to, the kind of more recent stars that have the same kind of organic following as Bret. So people like Bryan Danielson and CM Punk, people where it doesn't matter what creative does to them, or it doesn't matter what position they have in the card, the fans are always with them. And I think that Bret, no matter whether he was wrestling at the top of a card or he was wrestling Doink the Clown, or Jean-Pierre Lafitte for his jacket, like whatever he was doing, he still always had the best match on the card, and he always gave it his all. And I think that's what the fans certainly appreciated at the time, but then what people have really appreciated as a legacy thing with Bret is just going back and looking at his body of work. And you hear so many of today's workers, and obviously CM Punk is very, very vocal talking about the influence that Bret had on his life, but you see so many workers. Nick Aldis is another one who I've spoken to a lot about, growing up as a Bret Hart guy. People still study tape of him to this day, and rightly so, to understand how to tell a story in the ring, because every match that Bret had was different, and he was always able to tell these stories so often where he was the underdog, and it always looked like he was on the brink of loss, and then he'd pull it back somehow. And you only have to go back, for me, to King of the Ring 1993 to see how he was able to have 3 completely different matches with completely different opponents and win in 3 completely different ways. And I just think there's so many lessons there for the wrestlers of today to learn from what Bret was able to do during that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. He could get sympathy working with, somebody as big as Yokozuna, but he could also work with smaller guys like Shawn Michaels or Jerry Lawler. And then with Owen, it was just an incredible hold for hold match, and it was great because it certainly sparked Owen's career at a time when he really needed it, because he had been kind of in the shadows of Bret, and they didn't exploit Owen as well as they should have. They kind of wasted him the first few times they had brought him in, and when they turned him heel on Bret, and they had that pretty classic match at WrestleMania. It was great to hear Bret loses an earlier match to Owen, and then he comes back later on the show and wins a title from Yokozuna, so, and then, he and Owen had a pretty good run for about 7 or 8 months, and great matches. I mean, a lot of those were 50, 60-minute matches. They had those Iron Man matches, and, with Bret, it was pretty amazing how he could go the distance, with bigger guys, smaller guys. He could work with someone like, 1-2-3 Kid, and have an incredible match with a high flyer, right? Or a larger than life heel like Sid. And that's just how versatile he was, and Bret was a real psychologist, and he always knew how to get the best out of his opponent and get the best results possible. So I think he's had a pretty amazing career, and I think he's earned everything he's ever achieved. He did it the hard way and through a lot of adversity, and a few people that held him back and a few injuries, and he's been very resilient, and overcame a lot of obstacles to be as successful as he was.